Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. Welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk, where we celebrate food and honor those who champion the cause of food in society. Hello, welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. I am your regular host, Abdul, and today I have with me a very interesting guest who happen to be visiting the University of Guelph, Canada's Food University, for a program called the Agri-Food Excellence Symposium. My guest is Dr. Lenore Newman from the University of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia. She's a Canada Research Chair at the university, and I'm privileged to have her with me to be able to discuss a few issues around her research and her personal interest. So without taking my time, let me give Dr. Lenore Newman the opportunity to introduce herself.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Dr. Lenore Newman, and I hold a Canada Research Chair in Food Security at the University of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia, and I'm also the director of the Food and Agriculture Institute there. And I've been working in food for about 10 years as an academic discipline, and before that I also worked in the industry a bit, mainly in the restaurant and bar sector and such, and it's sort of a long-term passion. And yeah, my research really focuses on a couple of areas. The main one is agricultural land use and how it supports food security and culture. And I also look at emerging food technologies. Right now I'm spending quite a bit of time looking at the shift to plant-based diets. And I wrote a book on Canadian food called Speaking in Cod Tongues. And my next book is coming out this fall, and it's on culinary extinction and how that will impact the future of food.
That sounds interesting. I look forward to reading the book. I've read a few reviews on your Facebook, and they were really interesting stuff. And
well, it was a lot of fun because I got to go across the country. It took me several years, and I pretty well ate in every province and the territories, and met a lot of great people and ate a lot of good food. So
yeah, when I saw the title, Speaking in Cod Tongues, what came into my mind was this something informed by some kind of tradition for Newfoundland? Because I spent my first 2 years in Canada in Newfoundland, and the cod, was a big thing out there.
Oh yes, it certainly is, and it is a very traditional dish, cod tongues and cheeks.
Yeah.
And it's Newfoundlanders are very proud of their cod, and the story of the cod and its near extinction, it really struck me. It's and a lot of my work is about how what happens on the land and in the ocean impacts culture.
Absolutely.
And the loss of cod really had a strong impact on Newfoundland's food culture.
Yeah, because most of everything out there was built around the cod industry, and when the industry collapsed, it kind of turned the whole province upside down to some extent.
Oh, it totally did, and to the degree that in Newfoundland often cod is just referred to as fish, because if you're eating fish, it's probably cod. So, and so the loss of that fishery was very felt all through the culture.
Yeah, this sounds very interesting, and like I mentioned, I want to really know, you mentioned earlier that this is all about the passion you have about food and your experience working in the industry as well. I'm just wondering where you derived that passion from. Is it from like your own personal background growing up, or like where did it start?
Yeah, well, I was actually born into a fishing family, and I grew up on a halibut boat.
Okay.
And so I was in the food industry right from the start and was surrounded by people who dealt with food. And that's how my family made its living. And so I was surrounded by people who harvested fish and who farmed. And so the food system was sort of in my blood from the start. And I ended up, I studied physics at university and ended up then taking that more in environmental sort of direction so I could tie it back to food. And so I come at it from a bit of a scientific bent, but also a very personal one as well.
That sounds really interesting, because I would say that the last thing I would think of if someone tells me they studied physics would be to find a person interested in like farmland preservation or like agriculture more broadly.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a tangled chain, but when I was doing my physics degree, I was very interested in complex systems and sort of the mechanics of complex systems.
Okay.
And I started from there. I ended up becoming very interested in sustainability and how do we actually interact with the ecology. And how I came back to food was I realized food was key in that everywhere, everyone engages with the food system every day.
Every day.
And yeah, and so my thought was, if we can do food right, we'll probably survive. But if we can't do food right, the rest probably doesn't matter because it's such an important system. It is the critical keystone to human survival. And so I ended up taking my scientific knowledge and moving that into application in the food realm. And the land use piece was a bit of a surprise, but in British Columbia, when I got to there, I started to realize how critical the land piece is. British Columbia has a very strict set of rules around preservation of farmland because there's so little farmland there.
Okay.
And it's very productive farmland. And I started to realize that looking at that model, as the British Columbia model, it gave me a bit of a pathway to thinking about, well, what could we do on the global level to think about this issue of preserving our farmland, using it to best effect, to make sure that we actually have the food.
Like you mentioned, this is an absolute tangle with the way you've been able to carve out from your physics into your personal experiences and embedding it into the specific context where you do your research in British Columbia. Sounds really interesting. So I'm just wondering, like you mentioned earlier that you traveled almost through the entire country in writing your first book. I'm just wondering, since the start of your research career, what has been the most interesting thing? I know this is more of a far-fetched question because researchers will, when you ask people this kind of question, people tell you there's just so many experiences that are worth noting. But are just very specific things or a particular experience that struck you whilst you were doing research, your entire research career so far?
Oh, that's a hard question, and there's probably a few. One of the ones that really sticks with me is I was asked to come down to Australia and do a series of talks on farmland preservation. And we often don't think of Australia as a place with a farmland crisis because it's very large, but of course only a tiny bit of the continent, or subcontinent I suppose, can be used for agriculture, and they have very bad urban sprawl.
Okay.
And the model in Australia is everyone wants to have their little half acre with their house on it. And that doesn't work in that there's just not enough farmland and there's very little protection. There's no federal protection. And so they're now trying to look at the sort of lower level, municipal level protections, trying to limit the loss of farmland. And at the same time, climate change is making their environment extremely unstable, very hot. And the deserts are moving in from one direction and the housing is moving in from the other. And so it is a bit of a challenge. And to maintain their food security, they have to solve it. And that was fascinating. Because at one level, they may not have federal protection for farmland, but on the grassroots, they have fascinating people, hundreds and hundreds of people I met on my tour of Australia. Everywhere I spoke, there were people doing amazing things, regenerative agriculture and urban growing and just all this amazing work. And I came back very, very sort of revitalized. Mm. And so that's one example. I would say another example of something that really stuck with me. I recently was on a provincial level ministerial committee to reform British Columbia's land reserve legislation.
Okay.
And one of the problems we had to struggle with was to limit the sort of abuse of farmland, dumping of urban debris, building of mega mansions, we call them out west, and working with government to craft actual legislation. I realized it's one thing to be an academic saying you should do this and you should do that. But actually working to see how legislation works, how it's a balance between ministries and how there's always compromise. It was a fascinating experience, and we did manage to have input into 2 bills that were passed, and it was fascinating, and I'd love to do more of that down the road.
Yeah, that sounds great, and I think many people who have been in academics and haven't really had the opportunity to work in policy environments will not be able to appreciate some of those challenges. So it's always worth it when academics have the opportunity to interact with that other end.
Exactly, and that for me was a really interesting experience. Don't think I'll be running off to run for office just at the moment, but it was fascinating. And this sector too is so vibrant, and I tell my students there is so much opportunity in food and agriculture right now. We're on the cusp of incredible technological change, and we're also dealing with incredible challenges. From a shifting climate. Yeah. And so for someone entering the field, there's just so much to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with the fact that we are actually in that middle ground where there's just so much to do, because yes, whilst we have the opportunities through the technologies, we are also being challenged by very natural phenomena that we really have not so much control over.
Oh, exactly. And I'm an optimist, and I like to think we'll meet our challenges, but it is definitely a time where I get up in the morning and there's just so much to work on. I'm never bored in this job.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, you are an optimist, which means that definitely you are always looking ahead with a lot of hope. I'm just wondering, one thing I always ask people is that at this point in time, what will you see as the most pressing challenge in the Canadian agri-food system, and what do you think we can actually do about that?
Well, my answer might be a little different than what a lot of people would say. One of my areas of current research is watching the evolution of plant-based technology and also meat replacement through lab-grown products and such. And they've moved very rapidly from science fiction to near to market or in the market. And we can only need to look at Beyond Burger and how it's performed in the market to see that there's a shift going on that's very profound. And I really feel that Canada's food system isn't well placed to adapt to this change. And it might be a fad, but it might not be. And certainly from an environmental view and a health view, we know that we need to eat less meat to have a healthy diet. And we also know that everyone on Earth cannot eat as much animal product as North Americans. There's just no way to do it.
Yeah.
I do feel, though, Canada has, we preference animal production through the supply management system. Yeah. And, we also tend culturally to have quite a meat-heavy diet. And I worry that we're going to miss some of the early opportunities that are emerging just because we don't have the policy landscape or the funding infrastructure to support innovation and development. And when I go down to Silicon Valley and see what they're doing and the investment and the the new products coming online, I'm like, oh, we got to capture some of that. We should be doing it. And I do worry that we're a little behind. And I think that's a challenge for us. And really, it's about just taking the step and saying, yes, I'm going to invest in this, and to make sure universities are, putting some research money into it. Mm-hmm. Let's try and take the incredible infrastructure we have and become a world leader in these new technologies.
Absolutely. I do think that Canada is always trying to pride itself as one of those sustainable countries in terms of the agri-food industry, and the government has been trying so hard to push in efforts that will place Canada as a leader in agri-food in the world. And if they are going to do that without putting in place enough measures that will be able to capture some of these opportunities, it might be difficult. And we are speaking about this at a time that's, I would say, which is very timely. I think last week or so, they launched the Canada food policy or so. I don't know, in your opinions, or what do you think like strategies like this might do or might help contribute towards placing Canada as a leader?
I think we need a food policy, no question. And I think it's a good step in the right direction. I do feel, though, that there's a bit of a disconnect between some of the thinkers and policymakers who have been trying to push forward a food policy and the big industry players. And that, I think, is a bit of a missed opportunity. Certainly some of the small-scale agriculture pieces, they don't fit well with bigger picture, the global picture of the agri-food industry.
Yeah.
And we still struggle with that. Also thought that food policy would have been nice to see some really, focused applications like school food programs across the country. And part of the problem is that agriculture is a strange portfolio because it's predominantly provincial, with a sprinkling of federal on top of it.
On top, yeah.
And so I thought it was a good start, but I think we have a long way to go on federal policy, and the provinces have to be on board ultimately.
So let's say, what would be your advice in terms of the next steps to take in that direction?
Well, I think that the think tanks and NGOs who've really been working hard to push the food policy need to get over their fear of big industry, and they need to connect with big industry. And that's been a long-standing divide in the food community in Canada. And the truth is, we're all on the same side. We're all trying to feed everyone.
Yeah.
So I think that would be very good. I also think a dedicated research funding package for agriculture, for university research, would be excellent, because it varies by province to province. And often at the federal level, people researching food and agriculture kind of fall in the crack between the social sciences and the hard sciences.
Hard sciences,
and they try and tailor their application to CIHR, or to the medical CIHR, or to the social sciences and humanities research, or to NSERC, the science body. But it's not a good fit. And if I look to the U.S., the U.S. has the USDA, which funds massive amounts of research, and there are agricultural universities in every state. And, of course, here today we're in Canada's leading agriculture university, or at least one of them. U of Saskatchewan might complain about that. But in any case, Guelph is known.
Yes, absolutely.
But really, a lot of the provinces don't have an agricultural university per se, and that's something we're really missing on. And I think we should look at the U.S., where Abraham Lincoln created a series of universities, one in every state, to study agriculture. And these are the land-grant universities. I think we should have gone big and bold, and the food policy should have said, hey, we are going to fund agricultural research at least one university in every province.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I can really relate to some of these. Whilst I was doing my master's thesis on Newfoundland, one of the things that you hear all over from the industry was the fact that there's virtually no institution in the province that is dedicated to agriculture, right?
Oh, exactly. And of course, Memorial does work on fisheries, which is great, but that's just part of the food system. And the more of it can be grown in Newfoundland, the better. And crops are grown there.
Yeah.
And yeah, totally. It's a huge problem right across the country. Even in British Columbia, and we're a major agricultural producer, we don't have a lot of research. We have a little bit at numerous universities, but it's kind of an afterthought. And it shouldn't be, because, once again, the one thing every human hopefully does most every day is eat.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's the most important system of all.
Absolutely. Like someone said, there's the only thought that unites all humans is the thought of food, because
yes, exactly.
Once you wake up, that's what you are thinking about. What do I eat? It's really important that we take that serious. So just trying to broaden our scope beyond Canada, because you mentioned of like a very fascinating experience you had in Australia, which is good, because it's always good that whatever we are doing, we try to also situate it within the broader context to see how our work can actually contribute to global food security, or to see how we can contribute to solving some of the challenges we have identified at the global level as well. And I know there are a lot of topics people are talking about right now. One specifically has to do with carbon tax, and especially carbon taxing and how its impacts on agriculture. But going beyond some of these things, from your experience researching food security and environment, what will be one of, or what do you see as the most pressing challenge in global food security?
Oh, it's a complex question. And I think, it's interesting, because on the negative side, climate change is going to be horrendous for agriculture, and it already is. And we're seeing that if we look at the American Corn Belt this year, it's largely flooded. They're just planting now.
Yep.
And if we look at that, that's one of the world's best funded agriculture program. It is the poorest and the smallest scale farmers who will suffer the most from climate change. And we need to get a head around that now, because that chain spread all the way back from our plate to all over the world. And think about it, I can walk into a store and buy a mango. That mango might have come from a farmer in Haiti who only has 10 or 12 mango trees, and carries them by bicycle to a processing center where then they slowly make their way to my plate. And those farmers are incredibly vulnerable to climate shifts. And we're just not ready. And, in my opinion, we've done so little that climate change is going to be much worse than we had hoped. And I think at this point, we really should start baking in about a 4-degree increase in temperature into our models and start asking the question, well, how do we produce enough food to keep civilization running in a world where disruptions are much more common? And to me, that is the question in agriculture today.
That's a very powerful statement.
Yes, and I know some people would feel the chill run up their spine at that 4-degree number, but realistically, given the situation globally and how little we're doing, we have to start hopefully not planning for a worst case scenario, because I don't think we can plan for a worst case scenario. We just can't. But we're looking at a medium case scenario for sure, in which agriculture is going to be severely disrupted. How do we make sure everyone still has food on the table? Because as long as there's food on the table, we have a chance. As soon as the food system collapses, civilization goes with it. And we've seen that time and time again through history.
Absolutely. And whilst we've been talking, I know we've focused a lot of our attention on what the government can do and some of the challenges that we are facing. I'm just wondering what we as ordinary citizens can actually contribute into this cause.
Well, I think the message is very clear that eat less meat is a reasonable approach. People can use their judgment. Doesn't have to mean go full vegetarian or vegan, although that's certainly very helpful from a climate point of view. Eat less meat, though, is a good place to start. And be a little more thoughtful in what you're buying. And it will cost more. There's no way around it. But if you think a little bit more carefully, where is my food coming from? Am I supporting farmers I believe in? Am I supporting businesses I believe in? And that could be a big business or a small business. I buy my peppers from a greenhouse that produces pretty well most of the peppers in British Columbia, but they do it in a very, very sustainable way. And, I look at it, if we do that, if we all think a little bit more about what we're eating, also food weight, and we all go on about it. We know about it, but that's an individual thing. I mean, of course, there's waste at the field level, but it's a little harder to correct for.
Yeah.
But at the home level is where most food is wasted. And so make sure you eat what you buy and don't buy too much at once. And, these are things that can immediately drop our footprint on the earth. And also, we might find we get a little healthier.
I would say that that's a powerful advice to everyone, including ourselves as well. And it's always good to have that thought of food and to understand what we are eating, and also make it possible to know why we are doing what we are doing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, mindfulness goes so far in this. And the nice thing is food is incremental. It's you deal with it every day. And so if you have a day that you just like, wow, I really trashed the earth today in my diet. I ate only food that was flown that day in from various parts of the world. Well, you can get up the next morning. You can start again. And there's not much in life we have that much flexibility about.
And just to try to wrap up things, I will also want to know, we've talked about individuals and we've talked about government. What can we as researchers also do in our small ways, contribute to sustaining the food system?
I would say at this point, one of the best things that food researchers can do is keep an open mind and let the science tell us what the best path is. And what I mean by that is there is still a bit of tension between, the small scale, organic, local, and large scale trade, big corporations. But the reality is complex and messy. And the truth is the best path forward is going to take both of these groups working together. So I think researchers just in this area, because food comes with emotions, it comes with baggage. And it's really easy to find ourselves kind of hoping for one answer when we're doing research and kind of steering our experiments that way, which of course is bad science. And we know that, but we're human. So it's really about keeping an open mind, watching the technologies, and saying, okay, well, putting these things together makes a viable path. And I think as researchers, we have to be really open, really honest, and just really trust our science.
Absolutely. Like I said, let's to conclude things. I really appreciate your time and you coming in just for a short while to Canada's Agricultural University and making time to talk to us. I wonder what your last message to our listeners would be.
Well, one thing I will say to students is, if you go into food and agriculture right now, I guarantee you'll have a fascinating career. And so I think it's a wonderful choice.
I think that befits the last message as we try to grow the next generation of people who will guide the direction we take to sustain our food system.
Oh, exactly. And I'm getting a little older. I'm getting tired. Eventually, someone's going to have to take over this gig, and it's a lot of fun. So there's bad days, but there's a lot of good days.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I hope you will enjoy your time.
Oh, no problem. I'm sure I will.
In golf. So today we've been listening to Dr. Lenore Newman from the University of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia. We've touched on a lot of issues ranging from her personal research interests and motivations to issues in Canada food policy, Canada's food system, and issues surrounding challenges of climate change in global food security. It has been an interesting discussion and I hope you enjoy today's session. Join me again for another exciting edition next week. Thank you for staying tuned. Thank you for listening to Food Farm Talk. See you next week for another exciting edition.